It sounds like you were forced to grow up a little bit early or a little soon because you said you would start doing chores or you were put to work when you were 5. So, did you feel like that's just kind of how it was? As a child, did you enjoy all of the responsibility or were you missing that connection with your parents?
I was definitely missing that connection with my parents, and I remember sometimes acting out to try to get their attention, but that didn't really work. I mean, we got negative attention at that point. So, like, if we acted out, it just is how it was. I remember wanting to play more sometimes. I felt like I was missing out on fun or playing because I had so many chores to do. But that's just how it was. I mean, all my brothers and sisters, we all had to do that. We all had to help each other out.
So let's talk
So,
about then when you did start rebelling and you started getting more of a taste of the outside world. It seemed like you wanted to do all these things simply because you wanted to rebel, not necessarily because, well, it seemed like that was a theme throughout your book, and I guess we'll get there when we get there, but it felt like a lot of times in your life you were doing things simply because you weren't allowed to do them versus you actually really wanted to do them. And I found that to be a theme throughout. But maybe that's not the case here because you're a teenager and of course you just want to experiment and do teenager things. So you start sneaking out with these English boys and you do have sex with them, which very hot and steamy, by the way. Again, the book, I was like, oh my goodness. Reading this book. So, what were those experiences like when you did kind of say, screw it, I'm just going to break all the rules?
it was freeing and worrisome at the same time because once I got a little taste of freedom, I just wanted to kind of go wild. But at the same time, I felt like I was going to go to hell or that I was sinning. So I would worry about that and that would like rein me back in a little bit. But one Sunday in church, my cousin came up to me and she was like giggling. And I'm like, what did you do? And she's like, oh, I snuck out with the boys, the English boys. And I'm like, what? What did you do? And she just kind of giggled and she's like, here's their number. You can call them and you can go do it too. So I was like, oh, this sounds really fun, but I never met these boys before. My mom and dad were going on vacation, and I was like, oh, here's my chance. So my cousin came over. I was so nervous. I was like, what are we gonna do? It was very nerve-wracking, but they picked us up. There were two guys, and they were smoking cigarettes and had beers. So they offered us a cigarette and beer, and it made me super dizzy when I smoked the cigarette, but was horrible. And we were driving around the country roads, and they're like, what do you want to do? And we were like, I don't know. They pulled down this long driveway, and it was February. It was snowy outside. And the one guy got out of the truck and he invited me to come with him. And like at that moment, I knew we were going to have sex. And he took his pants off and put them on the snow and asked me to lay on top of his pants. Now, that was my first time and I didn't know what to do, but I followed his lead. And yes, it was cold, and I was wearing my underdress and my English panties. And he asked me to take them off and got on top of me, and it was over before I knew it. But I felt so happy and excited, but worried at the same time because what did I just do? I just had sex with an English boy.
So at this point, were you still very much, I don't know if indoctrinated is the right word, but were you still very into the doctrine of the Amish? Did you have a lot of guilt over what you had done, or were you at this point trying to separate yourself from these rules, from the theology about going to hell and everything?
I still had a lot of guilt, but I was trying to separate myself because I really wanted to leave, but I didn't want to go to hell. And finally, I was like, whatever, if I go to hell, I'll just go to hell. Like it's something I'll have to deal with. And I started sneaking out more. And then one Sunday night, I got caught sneaking out. And I made a cherry pie for these English boys because we talk about baking sometimes when we hung out, and they were like, bring a pie. So I baked the extra cherry pie and I put it in the pantry, which was right next to my mom and dad's bedroom. And I left the window open so I could grab it when I snuck out. But my parents weren't sleeping yet. And when I grabbed the pie from the pantry window from the outside, I made a noise and my parents heard me. Just started running up the road. But before I knew it, they were calling my name. And I was like, oh no. And I threw the pie in the ditch and I had to take some deep breaths because I was like, they're going to think I was running away. And I walked back, and they were sure that I was running away. And I was like, no, I just couldn't sleep. I was going for a run, which I often did actually on Saturday nights. I'd go running. I loved to run. And they didn't believe me. But after that, I was like, I am done sneaking out. Like, I am going to leave. I don't want to sneak the rest of my life to have fun. This is ridiculous. And that's what was like my final straw that made me decide that I really was leaving. I didn't know when or how or where I was going at that point, but I knew I had to leave.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the guy that came into your life and how that eventually panned out.
My dad had a big farm and a sawmill, and these two guys would deliver logs to the farm for the sawmill. And one morning I was picking strawberries by myself, and the guy came to buy strawberries. And I was like, oh, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And I just blurted it out. I was like, I want to run away and I'm going to live with you. And I was like, can I please? And he was like, no, you're crazy. Absolutely no. And I was like, I might be crazy, but I really want to run away. Like, I really need a place. Like, please help me. And he thought about it and he was like, I'll be back to tell you. But that morning he all of a sudden started getting flirtatious with me, and he looked around and there was no one else in the garden, and my brothers were out in the field working and my sisters were in the house. So he's like, come on, follow me to the barn. And he leads me into an empty horse stall, and he made me give him a blowjob right there in the barn. And I was like, oh my God, what did I just do? Like, I couldn't believe what I just did. But I knew what was happening because when I snuck out and I would go to these English boys' houses sometimes, I would watch porn with them. But I'd never given a blowjob before, but I saw it and I was like, oh,
So you knew what it was.
yeah, I knew what was happening and what it was, but it freaked me out at the moment when it happened. But I felt naughty at the same time. I did not leave because I wanted to be with him. I left because I wanted to escape. So a week later, he comes back and he's like, you can stay with my mom if you take care of her, because she had dialysis 3 times a week. And that's a long story that's in the book, actually.
Yeah, it was intense. I was on the edge of my chair. What's going on? What's gonna happen? Because you had told them, okay, meet me at midnight, and then your sister kind of caught on that you were running away, and so then you were late and you run. I'm summarizing, so it's way better in the book. But you get there 2 hours late and they're not there, and then you're like, do I have to stay the night outside? I can't go home. It was this whole thing until they finally found you, you connected with them, and you realized at that point that he had a wife too.
Yeah, I didn't know that he had a wife until the night when I was leaving when they came. And meanwhile, we continued to like have a sexual relationship once in a while, me and this man, even though he had a wife. And like I said, I didn't leave to be with him. I just wanted to be out. But I felt powerless because I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know how to say no to him. And I felt horrible because here we're cheating on his wife. And he was a truck driver, and I would go on the road with him. He'd always be home at night, but we fooled around while I went to work with him. It was a pretty horrible situation looking back. And also he like kind of pimped me to his neighbor. And I didn't know what prostitution was at that point. I just thought his friend was being nice and giving me $20 for a blowjob or when he tried to have sex with me. But he was definitely grooming me, and it was at the time I had no idea what was, because I wasn't educated about sex or anything like that.